sports science rounds on volleyball, and specifically it's going to kind of talk about how we develop volleyball players from a grassroots level all the way up to elite, and what kind of things we have to think about when we're going through that process of development. What kind of things are important for performance, and what kind of progressions do we have to think about to make sure that it's all ingrained properly. So the first sort of topic that I think is important is defining elite and developmental, and how do you separate that, and how do you integrate that into the planning. I think one of the main differences are that elite performers have a competitive season that needs to be planned around. So short-term versus long-term planning. Higher importance for each individual competition. So if you're on the national team and you're in the summer, you're doing the FIVB World Tour, every week the tournament results are going to affect whether you're ranked the next week, whether you get main draw or not, whether you qualify, whether you make money. And so your ranking can really change drastically by one performance over another. Their intensity of practice will be a lot higher than a younger athlete at that point in their career. Now, a development athlete, on the other hand, if you're 15 or 16 years old, you know, life just sort of continues on. You have volleyball season with school, you have volleyball season with your club team, but we have sort of a long-term approach where we're looking at where you want to end up. So we can continue to develop a little bit at a time throughout the whole year, and we're not really concerned about one tournament or another, except for maybe provincials or nationals. There's going to be certain key tournaments, but week to week, you know, development is just as important as competition, whereas with those elite performers, the competition could mean your career. So you have to be both ready for it and take it into account. Then number two is that physical literacy is a main component for the graduation from development to elite. And thus each athlete can be sort of divided by their different qualities or elements. So when you're planning your training, you can start to understand which components are at which stage on a physical literacy continuum. Broken up the body in cervico and thoracic, scapulo-glenohumeral. We have sort of our trunk, so our pelvic and lumbar area, and then you have hip, knee, and ankle. So when we're looking at different components and where someone might be from a physical literacy standpoint, you could easily have areas in your upper body that are a lot further along or a lot further behind than maybe control of hip, knee, and ankle, or your stability in your trunk. So for physical literacy, I kind of use this sort of graduation of stages where awareness of the intended outcome. So how should a person look doing an exercise, or how should a specific body segment behave or joint be during an exercise, plus awareness of their own body, because sometimes an athlete can be aware of what they should do and can't feel themselves doing it. So how do those two tie together? Once you sort of can achieve that awareness, then you have to be able to gain control in static positions, control in dynamic positions, and then there's control under high load, high speed, or fatigue. So FITS has developed certain resources to talk about all the different ways of challenging sort of physical literacy or system stability to go along this progression. And so that's something that you have to kind of look at your whole body and say, like, where do I fit on certain parts? Because when you're planning your year, you might be at a very low area on one part of the body and not on the other, and injury can affect that also. So once you've kind of made those decisions, then you want to sort of build out each quality as you go, and you want to kind of find out which ones you want. Number two is that you have to start and go with a gap analysis, or a window of opportunity, or performance predictors for the sport. So you need to be able to look at the sport and look at the athlete and see, where do I fit along with what is needed in volleyball? And once you can kind of figure that out, then and you go along with your assessment of their physical literacy, you can start to plan the importance of each category. So Shepard did a study on analyzing the demands of different players on the court for indoor, and he showed that middles do the most jumping because they do more block jumps and attack jumps than anyone else. Setters and outside hitters have the same number of block jumps. So when you talk to a setter and talk about setters and their ability to jump, a lot of times I know when I'm talking to our developmental athletes, sometimes the setters are like, oh, I don't need my vert, I'm the setter. But they block just as often as a power, whereas power is that position where everyone thinks, I have to sky over everyone because I'm the big hitter, I'm going to get fed the most sets. So there's often this kind of disconnect, feeling like you don't need to jump, but setters, especially from a defensive standpoint, are going to need to jump just as often. Now, outside hitters attack more than setters and less than middle. So they obviously, vertical jump is important for them, but for a middle, you might now bring in the element of, okay, if I have more jumps, they might be quicker jumps, and that might be a whole different system than an outside hitter who has a lot more time to develop. If they know, okay, when we go on offense, I'm getting set up for a real big attack, they have the time to kind of constantly reload. Whereas middles, you might think about a different quality, trying to judge that frequency of jumping. So another point is that he had a different paper, and he showed senior national team athletes jumped higher than development national team athletes, and there was also one for that was in Australia, and there was another paper of professional or national team athletes in Brazil, and they found the same thing. So it would seem to be a very important factor if they're sort of the athletes that are graduating to the highest level on the national team seem to always jump higher than the ones that haven't. So vertical jump is definitely an important factor in volleyball performance. Playing position makes a difference on needs, but then how is that affected by a beach? You only have 2 players on the beach where you have 6 indoor, so now there's a whole bunch more variability of movement in a game where you may be in a game where you're attacking all the time, you may be in a game where you're just blocking all the time, you may be defending a lot, your partner may be defending a lot, and so you have to be ready for a lot more things. So when you're developing beach players, that's something that you might want to take into account from a movement perspective, is that they're not going to be quite as rigid in their tasks because they do cover a lot more ground and do a lot more things. So main physical determinants of volleyball players, you have anthropometrics, so height and weight are going to have a large effect on how well you perform. Now, we can't affect those very much. We can affect weight when it comes to body composition, and we can sort of advise how to eat, how to supplement, and sort of plan our training around body composition changes if we need to, but we can't make people taller. So that's one that you can keep an eye on, but we can't really control. Vertical jump height is one that we can control a lot. So we have a large hand in how much we can affect that. There's genetic components to how high people jump, but there's very much a trainability focus where you can definitely affect that. Conditioning, again, that's something that we can affect a lot. And I go into it a little bit more later, but I actually kind of just recopied the same section twice. But conditioning, you have to look at conditioning in a match and how that's going to differentiate from conditioning over a 4-day tournament, conditioning in extreme temperatures, and conditioning to handle high pressure situations. So you can analyze a volleyball match and look at sort of the time course of action to see what kind of systems you use, but that might be different than also, playing a number of matches over a week. So having a robust conditioning system can be very important for your performance and how well you fare in a match or a tournament. Acceleration and or change of direction. So there's obviously a certain amount of ground that's covered, but it's also limited. It's not a huge court. If you look at like a soccer game or a match or a hockey game or football, you could cover the whole field, right, in one movement or one play. Whereas in volleyball, there's only so far you can go. So it ends up being a lot shorter, but you have either this explosiveness toward the ball, quick changes of direction to obviously maybe go, cover a tip or get back and get a serve. Then you also have rotational power / spike power. So rotational power is really the foundation about how hard you hit, but there are certain aspects to the skill and how well you can move your arm in terms of spiking and serving. So if we go into, so then if you collaborate with both research, so looking at papers that talk about the physiological demand and what happens in a sport, along with the coach and the athlete, you can sort of identify areas of weakness and then begin to prioritize that in that space. So we talked about developing your program, and you have to start by peeling out your physical literacy components and finding out what needs work at different stages, and then you can sort of filter in your performance factors and start to say, like, how can I work on them at the same time, or can I? Sometimes, vertical jump, if you either have an injury or you are at certain level of dysfunction in your lower body and you don't have any control, then maybe your number one priority isn't to jump higher, it's to gain that control first. So once you figure out where on that continuum you are, you can factor in your different performance factors. Now if we go to vertical jump height, it's obviously a very high determinant of success, and it's highly affected by training. So there's a whole number of different ways that it can be affected. So the Determinants of Vertical Jump Power by Dr. Lamb. I didn't find it on PubMed, but it's out there somewhere. So we have, number one is motor coordination and timing. So this has to do with both the coordination of body segments as well as the use of momentum and the coordination of muscle firing. Number two is reactiveness and elasticity. So there's a whole different number of ways. I already said, like, a middle will go up for a block jump, they might go up for an attack. There's a number of different ways that we jump, and they're not always the same. So being able to use momentum and being able to get up quickly and be elastic is a skill in and of itself. Then we have leg power. That's a very important one. If you can't produce a lot of force, your ability to jump high is not going to be there. Back and hip extension power, also important. It's not the exact same as leg power. It can be done through different means. Integrated arm swing. This is a really important one where you can see a lot of development athletes that come in and don't really know how to use their arms with their legs. Now, you don't necessarily need gigantic upper body or arms to contribute, but you do need good timing and use of momentum, and I have some references later that will show that there's a significant impact that integrated arm swing can have on vertical jump. So making sure that not only is your upper body at least strong enough to be able to support that, but you also need the practice of timing your arm swing with your jump, and it has to be a technique that's built in. System stability, so anytime that you can withstand the momentum and the force that you're using to move and to create force and not have any energy leaks or body segments moving in different ways or joints coming out of position, that's going to have a great impact on performance, but also health as well. And then finally, no injuries or tissue compliance. So this is kind of looking at if everything is healthy, you're good. If not, these are some things that you're going to have to work on. Injury can have a huge effect on how you recruit your muscles, and it can also change ranges of motion and different things like that. So making sure that you're ready to compete and you're not hurt is an important concept. So that means that we can do a lot of different things to affect how well an athlete can jump high, and some of the different methods are plyometrics. And so one of the big ways in plyometrics that are used are drop jumps or depth jumps. You have weightlifting, so that's the snatch or the clean and jerk and its derivatives. You have strength, so building up squat, deadlift, different key movements, but really bringing up strength and not just absolute strength, but always making sure relative to your body. And so that's why if we go back to body composition, that will make a huge impact on how well you jump. If you have a low percentage of body fat, then your relative strength will always be higher if two people lift the same. And then finally, technical. Technical, you can't forget about jumping as a skill, and that it's really great to teach someone to squat 500 pounds and be able to do a 200-pound snatch and a 300-pound clean, and they can do drop jumps, but if they don't actually do jump or gather momentum in the right way or integrate their arm swing, it can really hold them back. So when you're trying to optimize all these other factors, you always have to work on the technical. Just like a sprinter can't just lift all day and never hit the track before a race, and a swimmer is not just going to decide that they're going to, simulate a whole bunch of breaststroke actions with maybe some pulleys or some bands and never go in the water. Jumping is the exact same. We always have to find ways to integrate the technique of jumping in with sort of the physiological adaptations that we get from these exercises. All right, so there's a couple of the references that were really interesting about technique. Feltner wrote a couple, and unfortunately I didn't have access to them, so I'm going off the abstracts here. But basically, the arm swing is really important, not just to add force or anything to the jump, but it actually changes the way that your lower body loads during the jumping movement. So putting more torque on your knee and hip extensors at the ending of a jump based on where moving your center of mass up and the arm swing pulling forward is an advantage to help you jump higher. So it's not just a matter of having huge arms saying my arms are going to pull me into the air, but it actually changes the way your legs are loaded throughout the whole process. Another really cool one about, I don't remember which one it was now because I can't read them all. There's one of the papers that assesses, Boris, vertical jump assessment on volleyball, a follow-up of three seasons of high level. So it was a European club, and I can't remember if it was a club team or a national team, but essentially professional level. And after 3 years, one of the big changes they noticed in performance was the use of arm swing for higher jumps rather than extra ground reaction force or extra power from their legs. So even at a professional level, there's still a window of opportunity to get better at jumping through the use of arms rather than just getting, say, I've already made it, but I can keep getting stronger every year. It's not just about strength, and that technique can still be achieved even at someone who might be at the highest level of volleyball. It doesn't mean that they've necessarily mastered using the actual technique of jumping. So then finally, plyometrics. Most common sort of plyometric based on kind of Verkhoshansky's definition is the drop jump. And so that involves dropping from a height and then trying to be as reactive off the ground as you can to then jump as high as you can in the air. And so this can be very effective, but it also requires a good stability and strength base to sort of meet the requirements. It's tough for a developing athlete to get off the ground quickly in the air if they don't have any strength or stability, because the momentum that's carrying off the first box can really overload their system. So starting with low amplitude, reactive or elastic based jumps can be really important for both teaching the skill of how to handle that kind of momentum, as well as giving yourself time to develop the strength and stability from your physical literacy to handle drop jumping. There was a couple of the papers that stronger athletes got way more effectiveness out of contrast training. So contrast training meaning their example was taking a 3-rep squat, half squat, and then combining it with unloaded squat jumps afterward. So the stronger athletes both performed better in the squat jump and then improved more over time in their vertical jumping from this method than athletes who weren't as strong, and they used 2 times body weight as the cutoff on athletes over were stronger and athletes below. Now this was rugby, so you obviously have athletes that are very strong.
So when you say 2 times body weight, are we talking about like on the bar, or like their body weight of themselves that lifting plus the weight?
On the bar. And I think they said parallel. Then so they got more out of sort of adding in plyometrics to their strength work in a contrast method. So that kind of goes back to strength being the foundation, is that as a stronger athlete there's certain methods that you can now utilize to better enhance your jumping ability that a weaker athlete might not be able to. And there was another one of Shepard articles on 12-month training-induced changes in elite international volleyball players, and they found the strongest correlation to increases in vertical jump height came from drop jumps rather than just strength or weightlifting exercises. And so they felt that it was the use of fast eccentric loading and the use of the stretch shortening cycle that was the biggest benefit for them increasing their jump height. So plyometrics become a very important one, but you have to be careful because it can put a lot of load and stress on the body. So you can't all of a sudden try to just say, I'm going to do plyometrics every day for the next 3 months, drop jumps all the time, and assume that you're going to jump higher without hurting yourself. So you have to start to put them in the right order. We already went over the other performance factors, but I know a really important question that Dr. Lamb and I were talking about the other day was acceleration / change of direction. When are they the same kind of mechanisms? When are they different? And is one more important than the other? So one of the papers that's in here looked at analysis of movement patterns by elite male players of beach volleyball by Cortel Tormo, and he looked at a whole bunch of hours of footage of a whole bunch of beach matches, and he found that they moves forward were way more common with any other direction. So advancing forward is the most common move, and attacking moves were way more common than defensive moves. So even though for every attack you assume someone's defending, I think it's more about slowly positioning yourself to the right place versus when you're attacking, you're always coming forward towards the net with a jump or a set, doing things like that. So when you look at acceleration, you could talk about like first step quickness or first few steps, and always trying to develop that quality, versus change of direction, which is more about changing of center of mass and your ability to accelerate from those different positions. So I don't know if you guys have an opinion about whether one is more apt than the other, or are they very similar? When you're teaching and training them, do they have similar effects to performance? So some of the key takeaways from that is that strength is an important foundation for the production of vertical ground reaction force and is a key in jumping. So there's a number of studies that are out there, and there's probably way more than you could find, that having a strong squat always will correlate well with a vertical jump. So that should be a priority. Now, weightlifting is a really interesting area because that can tie into both strength and power development, and especially pulls. So I put in a couple articles on how to teach the pulls and how to perform the pulls into that folder as well. So that's something you may want to check out. But I think there seems to be a lot of bang for the buck in terms of pulls. So they're not very complex. You should be able to teach like a mid-thigh pull fairly easily. So I think that's something that should always be built into the foundation, similar to a squat. Sometimes when we look at like a competition snatch or clean and jerk, we think about how difficult that can be for a developing athlete if they haven't built the skills yet. But a simple pull from a mid-thigh position only takes a few important cues and one or two positions. So it's something that we can start to teach with a dowel, with a training bar, and even with an Olympic bar fairly early to start to practice that skill. So there's a couple of papers that are listed in here where dynamic pulls have a very high correlation with vertical jump height, and also with the development of rate of force development, which is a key in jumping power. So that should be a key aspect of our athletic development as a foundation. It's very simple, like a squat, and I put Sean Fahey rounds on pulls. So, you know, in the future, possibly having a practical rounds where maybe Sean can lead teaching of the weightlifting movements, or Glenn, or Sean and Glenn together, either or, teaching how we do pulls and all of the different derivatives of weightlifting, so that as coaches we can all become familiar. Technique is significant, so learning arm swing as well as overall coordination. So you have to practice this frequently, even if it's not intense. So intensity can be related to like ground contact time and how high you're trying to jump, but you could do low amplitude jumps and talk about how you're trying to jump, or even pause in certain positions. So the technique of jumping is obviously a very, very important factor and needs to be practiced often, and we can't forget that.